I'm Amanda. I'm the manager of Health Leadership Academy, and I've had the pleasure of being with the Health Leadership Academy for some time now. We have some wonderful guests with us today, several folks who have been in the Emerging Leaders Program, which is one of several programs we have on offer. We also have Joanna here. She's the communications officer for the Health Leadership Academy. Joanna, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you. And thank you for joining us today, Lauren. Really appreciate it.
And we're very much looking forward to hearing more from Lauren. So we do, like I said, do expect a small group. And maybe, Lauren, maybe it's worth us getting started because
yeah, for sure.
Only a few people. I mean, we can start the conversations and get you going. So I did a little bit of introduction, but I haven't heard from everybody as to why you're here. So we still do invite you to introduce why you're here, what you're interested in learning about, if not verbally in the chat. So feel free to come on and do that. And as you do that, I'm going to let Lauren introduce herself in a minute, but I also have a few questions for Lauren, just so everybody can know a little bit about her in a different context. Lauren, are you okay with that still?
Yeah, can I just double check that everyone can see the PowerPoint is a full screen? Perfect.
I certainly can.
All the thumbs up.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask Lauren a few rapid fire questions. First thought that comes into your head. And this way we can get to know you more and you can jump right on in. So what was the last book you read?
It was Becoming by Michelle Obama. Has anybody else read it? Okay, I was gonna say it was super popular and I was really behind in getting to it, but it was such a good book. So good.
Hopefully, yeah, definitely a great read for anybody who hasn't. What is something people often get wrong about you?
It's funny. I think people think I have a really big personal bubble, but outside of the COVID world, I actually really like hugs. Love hugs to say hello and goodbye. So.
I like hugs too. I love it. Okay. And if you could build one skill in an instant, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. I'd be curious what others' answers are. Throw them in the chat if you have ideas. I wish I was more witty in the moment. That's one thing I'm not. That'd be helpful.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to you now and let you take over and walk us through advocacy as a resident physician.
Thanks. And Anna had a great idea for a skill. She said photographic memory. That's a really good idea. Silver tongue. Yeah, same thing, Abraham. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Because it is a small group, feel free to throw out comments in the chat or just come off mute and say or ask anything along the way. We'll sort of jump right into it, but I'm Lauren. I am a resident physician and I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy and some of the things that I've learned since doing the Health Leadership Academy program back in 2019. Also, the last time it was in person. I looked at this picture when I was putting it in and I was shocked by how closely we're all standing together. It was, yeah, different world back then, hey? So as I mentioned, I am a resident. I'm in my 4th year of public health residency. And I also finished my family medicine residency about a year, yeah, almost exactly a year ago now. So that's exciting. In the leadership world, I have one role that's kind of finishing up now. That's a Vice President of Leadership and Education as part of the Provincial Residents Association here in Alberta. And as of July 1st, I'll be stepping into the president role. I'm based out of Calgary. So presenting today to, I think, some of you that are in Ontario, which is exciting. So thanks for coming over your lunchtime to chat. Just throwing out quick disclosures here. I have no conflicts, no financial conflicts, nobody's paying me. If I do tell any stories, I might change some dates and names just to protect privacy. And I guess the other thing that I'll throw out there is that everything that looks like it belongs to Disney belongs to Disney in this. So let's just jump on into this. So I was making this presentation and I had not realized that Finding Nemo was 18 years old this year. Does not feel that old to me at all. But as I was thinking about brainstorming for this presentation, the idea of being sort of small in this giant big ocean and trying not to get eaten by sharks, so to say, came into my mind. And then I thought about Bruce, the big old shark who looks really scary, but who is leading the Fish Are Friends, Not Food movement. And I thought that just really nicely encapsulated how I would describe advocacy as a small fish in a big ocean. There are some scary things out there, but often I think it's easier to make them scarier in our head than they are in real life, although you do have to be aware of what's going on around you. So we're going to use Finding Nemo today to talk about advocacy. And if you have any good Finding Nemo memories, questions, jokes, throw them out there. That would be fun. So, sorry, I'm just going to move the picture of everyone out of the way so I can see my full screen here. There we go. So when I think about things that I've learned over the past year and a bit in the world of leadership, it has been quite a year, hey, with COVID. If you're familiar with the medical education world, you know that there's been quite a bit of drama around exams. And trying to navigate all this as sort of a voice of residents has been tricky, to say the least. And so I thought about sort of three main things to think about along the way. That's getting to know the environment and kind of what's going on around you, getting to know the other people that are working in this picture with you, and then most importantly, because you're the common element in everything that you do, is getting to know yourself really well. And I'm really glad that I had the chance to do the Health Leadership Academy back in 2019, because we really focused a lot on understanding these. And I think it gave me a really helpful base for going into this very difficult year. So if you have any questions about the Academy, about some of the activities, I'll try to bring some stories in, but please ask further. So the first of these big ones was getting to know the outside world. There's this great scene in Finding Nemo where Marlin and Dory are trying to go and find, was it 92 Wallaby Way, Sydney? And they're on Crush, and they have to go through that tube, which they call the swirling vortex of terror. And so Crush says, all right, hold on, your exit's coming up. Dory sees it, and Marlin says, oh my goodness, the swirling vortex of terror. Crush says, that's it. This is sometimes exactly how I felt about the medical education world. Take time, I might not go YouTube video for now. If we have time later, we'll watch it. But this is like a simplified map of the medical education world. Don't worry about all the acronyms. I know there's a lot there. We don't need to go into what they are, just knowing that there's a lot of different players going on here. And when you're trying to act on one of them, if you move one, influence it, take something away, everything else in this whole map is going to be influenced. So what I really took away from all this is understanding the details as much as you can and the perspectives of all of these different forces that are at play. Unfortunately, for people who are in medicine, this often means that we have to look at the policies, the regulations, the processes and procedures, which can sound really, really dull, but it was knowing those sort of hard details that made such a huge difference in being able to find common ground with other organizations, other people that maybe we're coming from a different perspective and trying to align so that we can get through this year of COVID together. I think one of the examples that we had from the Health Leadership Academy that really, really identified this well was we spent a whole day doing an airplane activity where essentially the whole group, it was like 16 of us, were an assembly line for making paper airplanes. Has anybody done something similar to this in the past or has done HLA? Okay, I'm seeing a couple nods, a couple stares. Okay, so we got some variation. Throw a comment in. So with all this going on and everybody has a role, but you only get your own role and you don't know anybody else's. And it's really tricky to figure out what's going on. And oddly enough, the easiest thing to do to help everybody in this situation was to just start off by just doing your tiny little job. And it was through doing your small job and getting to know what everybody else's job was, getting to know their perspectives, their goals, their outcomes, who was in charge, who wasn't in charge, that we were able to work better as a team and become more efficient. But it was hard to just start by putting a sticker on a paper airplane for 15 minutes. All I did was put a sticker on an airplane. So that was a really good lesson for me. And I have to say, side lesson to that was my sticker partner was such a cool person who told me all about her life. We explored some great stories. So a little silver lining to just putting stickers on airplanes. Any comments or questions on that one? So I'm trying to keep track of the videos and chat in the background. But
I was curious. So was it like an assembly line thing that you guys were doing?
I can't remember how many steps in the line there were, maybe 8 or 9, and we were usually in pairs. And each person had just a very small part of, cutting the paper, putting a line on the paper, folding the paper, put a sticking on the paper, testing it out, changing it up. But you didn't know what everybody was doing to start with. You all just had your own job, and it said you were number like 1 or 6 or 7. And so we had to spend the whole day understanding the system, first of all, before we could go ahead and make any changes. So it was tricky, I have to say. There was a lot of emotions, let's put it that way, which is the real world. Did you have a second half of that question, or did I answer that?
No, I was just like, I had a feeling it was like that, but I'm imagining that on a larger scale. Like if the airplane was that tough, then yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great metaphor for life, I have to say. So the second big lesson that I learned from this past year is you have all these other organizations and all the forces, and then you have all the people that are working there right there with you. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that everybody here was trying to do their best. Everybody has their own motivations and perspectives, and there's always common ground to find, although sometimes it was really difficult to find it. And especially when you are near the bottom of that, of the food chain, it is especially important to know who above you, where they're coming from, what they want to get done, and where you fit into it. Because the honest truth is, when we're in this culture of a very strong hierarchy, you have to work extra hard to have your voice heard. So you really, really need to be very careful about what you're saying, who you're saying what to, finding your allies. And I thought Finding Nemo, if you remember the details from this particular scene, it was really metaphor for that. Because at this point, Nemo, the little clownfish there, is stuck in an aquarium in a dentist's office. And this team of fish come together to try and get Nemo back into the ocean, and eventually try and get themselves all back out to the ocean too. And so if I was Nemo, there's a couple things that I would remember from this team, such as we have Bubbles, whose main motivation is bubbles. And understanding motivation was so key. Then there was Gil, who was kind of this team leader, very experienced, good at planning, organization. And really important here was understanding that the goals were the same between yourself and Gil. You have the team builders, the collaborative people, keeping them in mind, understanding how you can work together, how you can help them, they can help you. Whatever your goal is was super important. And of course, understanding where you have people that maybe aren't going to come into the same place as you, and they're going to want something completely different. This was a huge deal this year when there was an exam that was having so many issues, including technical, that up to 50% of people writing this exam on a particular day weren't able to finish it. So it wasn't like they failed the exam. It was just that the issues were so big, they weren't able to complete it. It's about a $3,000 exam. And this was, for some people, the 3rd time they'd attempted to write it, but because of COVID, it hadn't worked. And when these issues came up, there was a lot going on all across Canada at different levels in that map to try and figure out what to do next. And me as this little resident who's in this provincial association, I happened to sit on the college here in Alberta, and I ended up being the voice for Alberta residents at the college to try and advocate for residents who are stuck in this exam situation. And it was absolutely critical to know, so who was involved with college leadership, who's involved with the association that's doing the exam, who's involved with the universities and what their perspective is, because this was so tangly, and it was really easy to just not find common ground, especially as a bottom person in this food chain. It was, yeah, that would definitely be a big takeaway here, is just really think a lot about the people around you. Build those relationships early and it'll help later on. I'll bring in the HLA story for that one, sort of as we continue into this story. So I mentioned that I'd mentioned that I was thinking about Bruce a little bit. I was coming up to this talk. And this is Bruce, the shark here. And this is Dory and Marlon, kind of when they first meet Bruce. So this was a very interesting moment in the movie because they don't look stressed out yet. That's because they don't know Bruce is behind them quite yet. It can get pretty stressful in about a second. And so if we were these fish in this situation, kind of thinking about ourselves and how we are going to interact under stress, how we're going to manage the situation, was also a really important part of this past year. So we look at Dory in particular, because let's be honest, Dory is everybody's favorite fish out there. As we're heading into this very difficult, tangly space with a shark that we don't realize is trying to be vegetarian. Might have to think a little bit about our skills or where we need some help going into this. So for Dory, she's multilingual, also speaks whale, and she's very emotionally intelligent, but she does need some help from her friends with her memory. And as they are escaping from the sharks, they end up in a whale. The whale helps them. This particular scene just really showed how one character using their strengths, but also reaching out to other people and knowing or thinking a lot about their role in this space helped them get out of literally a whale's stomach. In the Health Leadership Academy, the whole first section of the academy is about self-reflection. There's many scoring scales that you do about yourself, and you spend a lot of time talking about this with yourself, with your friends, with your teammates. And it was an incredible moment to think about things that are going well, things that aren't going as well, in terms of your skills and skill development. And one of the scores that I really enjoyed is we talked about our influence style. I found this past year when I was working in a pretty tangly environment, like at the college where I was kind of this voice, understanding my influence style and how it worked or didn't work with the other people at the table, people who maybe were not vegetarian sharks. This was really critical for essentially not making a mistake that could have a long-term professional consequence down the road. And I would encourage everyone, if you have a chance to do these personality scores or influence scores or join the Health Leadership Academy and get to do some of this work, it's really interesting and it's really critical. Those are just a couple of quick, brief thoughts. I didn't want to take up too much time, but I just want to leave you with my favorite Dory quote, "Just keep swimming." If there was a theme for this past year, I feel like Dory hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what COVID's been like in public health. As a resident in leadership, there's been a lot going on, and we're just going to keep on going. So we're just going to keep on swimming, being there for our team, for each other. And these are the two teams at the Health Leadership Academy who I am so grateful for, because they helped me keep on swimming when we were doing this program, and from then on throughout this entire year. I'll just stop there and say thank you so much for coming, for throwing out some comments, and yeah, let's go ahead and go with the discussion.
Lauren, thank you for sharing such a great metaphor with such great integrative and interpersonal capabilities that you express, that you have experienced, but also been able to apply in your leadership. That was really great. Thank you for doing that. And I'm sure, you know, we have a small group and I can see most of everyone, which is great. What do you want to talk about now? If anybody has anything they want to bring up, share, invite into a dialogue, please feel free to unmute yourself. And if you don't feel comfortable, put that in the chat.
I was curious, you know, with the context of, you know, the whole online situation, how did you guys sort of adjust with the HLA program? What's that going to look like in, say, August? I'm assuming we'll still be online then.
Yeah, so after this segment, we will go into more detail around that. Feel free to stick around and I can walk you through a little bit more of that. But we have modified the program just briefly virtually, so that, for example, that exercise Lauren was talking about with paper planes can't physically be done in person. So we've taken a 2-week program, made it into a 1-week intensive with pre and post components, that some of them are a little bit more external to the intensive component of the program, but still very much embedded. So the core themes, the core learning remains the same. It's just how it's applied and how you engage with it is a little bit different than it would be in person. We did run the virtual session in the spring, and I would say it went really well. We had very positive input and reflections in terms of what people walked away with. And one of those things you walked away with that Lauren didn't mention is your own leadership portfolio. So a lot of these things that you're reflecting on yourself, for yourself, gets embedded within that portfolio. So for example, Lauren mentioned the influence style indicator and knowing how you influence. That can be in your portfolio, but you also make sense of, well, what do I do with that? Right? How do I apply that? What does that mean for me? And, you know, hard truth is sometimes you don't know until you're in that provincial situation and you're like, okay, something's happening, but you now have the awareness that something's happening and you can go back to that and say, now what can I do with that? Yeah.
I feel like one of the things about, I'll answer really quickly or just comment that really quickly. But one of the things about the Health Leadership Academy that was really neat was how we were able to create stress even in this very short timeline. And that really brings out your personalities, your strengths, your weaknesses, your team, your ability to work together as a team. And I feel like that will translate probably quite well to virtual. So I think virtual has its own stressors, but it's also, I think, a big part of our reality of where we're going in health, but in general in society. So I think that will translate really well going forward.
That's a great point, Lauren. And yes, we don't normally tell everybody we create stress for them, but it is definitely vital in order to demonstrate your strengths and areas for improvement, right? But not to leave you hanging. It's not like you're going to walk away feeling stressed. So just so you know.
It's fun stress. It's like you have a leadership, you have a team behind you. It's activity based. Yeah, not bad stress.
What else is coming up? Anna?
Yeah, I really liked your talk. I like the analogy as well. I can't believe it's been so long since I first watched Finding Nemo. And I think it's interesting to think about like influence and styles of influence. And I think when I was in the program, like communication is a part of that as well. And something I feel like I've seen with COVID in particular, but I think there was sort of this trend prior to that as well, is like the role of social media, particularly in medicine as a form of advocacy, and how one person can, like how to navigate that. I'd love to get your thoughts, like as a resident physician, because I feel like some of the examples you gave, for example, that big test. Like, I feel like I read on my Twitter so much chatter about, making change, or even from the perspective of COVID, there's been a lot of work on the advocacy front on social media. So it's a very nebulous question, but I think it's really comes down to sort of what you think about the role of social media as a form of influence, as a form of an advocacy tool in the areas of sort of health and medicine.
That's such a good point. I'm trying to remember now, but I think the physician assistants have had some of the similar issues with exams and regulation that physicians have as well this past year. I think every profession has, or many. Yeah, social media is such an interesting topic, and I debated whether to put it in or not, because as you said, it's quite nebulous. One of the things that I really found tricky to navigate, and it'd be interesting to hear what you think about this, is from an organizational perspective. I find that especially the sort of millennial Gen Z, somewhat Gen X groups almost expect advocacy from organizations on social media, or expect updates on what advocacy is being done on social media. And then balancing that with the fact that something like Twitter is a very public forum, and organizations have to balance their relationships and can't necessarily disclose what they're doing publicly. They can't necessarily throw a partnership under the bus and be like, oh, we just had a bad meeting with them and now we're upset. Because that would ruin a relationship that you need to keep for a topic that's going to come up later, or for to have another conversation. So personally, I've stayed silent for the same reason. It's not that advocacy isn't being done, but just because I've found that I have other areas to advocate, other ways to advocate that I think are more beneficial to myself professionally, as well as to the topic I'm trying to advocate on. But it does make it hard, because people have said, like, para, our organization isn't doing anything, or like our executive isn't being vocal enough. And I don't 100% know how to balance it, other than sort of what I was saying about understand the environment and the people I was at the table with don't like social media advocacy. So I knew if I was going to make ground with them, that was not going to help my case. Yeah. Curious about your own thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's tough. I feel like as a person, I'm very hesitant to, like, I have Twitter, but I'm more of a reader and a scroller rather than a contributor, for a variety of reasons, because I think sometimes the speed at which social media works, I do not have the capacity to follow and keep track of. And I agree with you. It is a very public space, and it's something I struggle with in terms of like wanting to contribute, wanting to like be able to say the right thing. And I think Twitter now, it's like 240 characters or less on sometimes like very complex, multifaceted, multi-partnered, big issues. But at the same time, then I understand the argument about, like if you're not saying something in the public sphere to sort of like put your position in the ground, or stake your claim, or say what you feel publicly so others can sort of challenge you or hold you accountable, or talk with you about it. What does that mean about your role as an advocate, or what change you can make in a broader space? I'm not sure. I don't have a good answer either. Because I'm probably, like, I see a lot of people on social media that I follow that are very good at it, and I think they've found a right balance, but I've yet to find that for myself. So we'll see.
I often find that whenever like something big happens, or within a field or worldwide, people who have a platform are almost expected to say something, but they're in such a difficult position because, like, sometimes these topics are so complex, they might not get or capture one side of the problem. And so it's a kind of like a tightrope of like, do you say something because you're obligated to? And is it like, even if you mess something up, is that better than not saying something at all? I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I would say, as someone, who's still younger and isn't necessarily part of an advocacy group, but looks at advocacy groups, I think it's better to still hear something. And if they mess up, then maybe they own up to it or fess up to it. But I lean more towards the communication side personally. but obviously I'm younger, so I don't have a huge perspective on it from the other end. So it's difficult. I know.
Well, I think too, it's really been, if you think about like COVID, and at least in Ontario, who I now see as sort of become like thought leaders on COVID in many ways, like it's they're tweeting back in like March, April, May, June of 2020 that has sort of, I think in some ways helped propel them into the roles that the public roles they've had now. And yeah, I mean, and that kind of speaks to your point, Ibrahim, about like erring on the side of communicating when you can versus sort of holding back, because a lot of those people have really helped, you know, spread messages that are, well, ideally, for the most part, that are helping to, you know, promote our recovery from this pandemic.
Yeah, Anna, I'm hearing the value of advocacy and finding your voice in that, and how that's not easy to do, right? In such a complex world with multiple stakeholders, with not having assurance of what would follow, right? And the coach in me and the person in me would say, Anna, what's your strength and how can you leverage that strength to find your voice, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's social media. Maybe it is, right? I don't know if anybody else has anything else they want to comment on that. But it's a weird place now, right? And social media is just one place in a weird place, right? Lauren, a different spin to the same topic. What else is going on for folks?
Dylan, Daniel, or Dave, any comments on that or anything else?
I joined late, so I'm kind of absorbing and catching up with where the talk is at. I mean, I can relate to the question on social media and navigating that, and questions around public image and expectation, and being cautious in those communications, because it is essentially, you know, a diplomatic communication, whether you want it to be or not, when you're in a place of leadership or expectant leadership.
Well said. What other thoughts were provoked from Lauren's conversation today?
I'll jump in. I've never been shy, as Lauren knows. I'll give you a slightly different perspective. Lauren knows this. When I first started off with the American Bar Association, working in groups like these, my very first assignment was with the Lawyers as Leaders group. And it's now been too many years after that. But I think this role, developing your leadership voice, as you put it, is an extremely important one. I know lawyers my colleagues are still struggling with the idea of what role do lawyers have in society, and your particular role as a physician, particularly as a public health physician, is an advocacy role. And I think it's important for you to take on that mantle, watch others, learn. I think it's so important to have mentors, and seek those kind of people out and talk to them and see what they're doing. It's not to say you mirror what they do, but you certainly learn from their adaptation of their personality and their gifts and how best they can make use of it. Some people are very good at social media, for example. Some people are very good in presentations, and some people are very good in the written word, putting out publications or blogs, as the case may be. I think it's so important to reflect back on your own particular strengths, as Amanda has said, and look for those opportunities where you can be an influencer or can be a role, have a role, particularly as medicine moves forward, because everything is undergoing change right now. That's one of the biggest factors. And, you know, look for ways to make your career succeed and make the most of your gifts.
I love it. I love it. What is everybody else's reaction?
Go for it, Ibrahim.
I was gonna say it makes you really think, like, you know, talking about finding your strengths in your voice. I'm wondering, it's kind of like a question, I guess, like from personal experience, when did you really feel like you had that voice, or are you still trying to find it? Because I feel like you can't, like, you know, like as you mentioned, as they've mentioned, that like everything's changing. So I'm assuming with that, then your voice also changes. So when do you feel like, at what point did you really feel comfortable with your own voice?
Oh, that is a good question to pull out of my dad's comment. Thank you. Oh, I don't know if I will ever feel comfortable to that extent, to be honest. Actually, one of my very first answers to Amanda's icebreaker questions is that I wish I was more witty. So for those of you who do that sort of like self or that emotional intelligence reflection thing, you probably took out of that I am in some ways coming to terms with my own voice, figuring out my own way of communication. And there are some things that I'm uncomfortable with in that way, and that I can see where I could use more strengths. Having said that, I think one of my strengths is that I am perceptive of other people at a table. I've been told I have that high level of emotional reading, but also I have an ability to keep track of really complex, messy, wicked problems sort of situations. And so being able to put those two together and keep track of really complex, messy, emotional situations and the different players at the board has been really helpful. So sometimes my voice is less of a obvious voice at the table, so much as it is navigating the picture or helping other people navigate the picture. And I think that actually brings up a really good point about advocacy, is that I think advocacy, at least in the medical world, physician world, it gets this sort of portrayal as being loud, almost like foot stompy loud, you know, social media advocate kind of thing. And I think that really, that doesn't do credit to the detail and the subtlety that advocacy can be, that sometimes it is just relationship building. And it was through relationship building for a full year sitting on this college, for example, before something super stressful for residents came up, that I was able to have a trusted voice at the table, because I read people in the year going into it. And I think my final note from that would be also knowing where you don't have a voice or shouldn't have a voice is potentially the hardest thing. I had to let go a lot of times throughout the year in that situation and many others, where I really had something that I hold quite strong, my sense of self. And I'm very sort of ethics and value driven in my work. And when I had to take a step back or compromise on that, that was really rough, especially when my brain knew if I take a step back, don't speak up right now, build relationship, have a different goal right now, not this other one, I will get more done. But I feel like I'm moving away from my ultimate goal, my value system, and I'm gonna have to sit and digest that for a bit before I'm okay with what I've done. So that was a rough part of finding voice. So comfortable? No. Figuring out something, kind of.
Yeah. I think your point's really interesting though, Lauren, too, in the sense of when you talked about like your approach and how, you know, when you've had to compromise or when you've, you know, your skills and used your skills, and sometimes this perception, particularly like in healthcare, of being a very vocal or outward facing advocacy function. And it makes me think that, you know, at the end of the day, and I don't think this is just health specific, but really across health, education, like many these big complex disciplines, where you sometimes need like a bit of different approaches to get things done. And it kind of makes me think about like in EHL, like when you're put in teams that have like contrasting or complementing styles or behaviors or approaches to problems or just backgrounds. At the end of the day, like what you end up getting, the result ends up being like probably more fulsome and reflective of the needs of a very diverse group. When you have sort of like the group that's maybe in this case of like advocacy, public facing or very vocal, and then those that are also maybe doing some, like you're describing, relationship building, sitting at tables, having conversations, sort of balancing both those and finding like a nice mix.
A great discussion and wonderful points raised here in finding a voice, different approaches, and knowing when or when not to use your voice, right? And how that, Lauren, you're doing such a good job of connecting it back to your values too. And I've totally, sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but it is wonderful dialogue that we're having in how it's being expressed, because there's so many dimensions to this, right? And that's what you're communicating, Lauren. That's what I'm hearing the groups noticing, that there's not one linear path and there's not one element that's contributing to what you're sensing in the world and how you can go about it, right? It's multifaceted, it changes, and you change as a result of that. Yeah.
Yeah, Ibrahim brought up that really great point of perhaps your perspective, your voice changes over time. 100%. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, we're having some really good dialogue. I'd love for it to continue. I'm also sensing the room a little bit and noticing some shifts. So I'm wondering where everybody is, if there's other questions people have. And if they don't, that's okay too. And I can transition into a different modality now. And for those who want to stay, they can. But I'll invite anybody to share or ask anything else they'd like to into the room first. Thank you for joining us.
Well, here we are. I'm sorry, I'm a little hoarse today. So I thought this discussion was great. I'm going to leave you guys to it. You're our next generation. We're in great hands. Carry on, folks. Great job, kid.
Oh, thanks, Dad. Thanks for coming. Oh, that's funny.
I love it.
Dylan, I see your message in the chat box. I don't think we have a scope at this point. It's turned into open discussion. Literally any comment and thought, we sort of started going down those pathways. So sky's the limit, I think. Do you have any comments?
I mean, I have, I guess the way that I found myself here is that I believe it was Sean Park that maybe directed me to the information about the program itself. And then my own history is that I work in traditional Chinese medicine and am interested in integrative care models. And I also work a lot with policy and education and at both a provincial and federal level for the profession. And so I have found myself in leadership roles, kind of not necessarily intentionally. So again, in terms of the scope, I guess one of my leadership questions is really, and I mean, I hear you talking about some of the skills to navigate these situations, but I do find that I'm working with very diverse and sometimes disagreeing perspectives on things. And this could be, just to give a few examples and not go on an entire tangent, but between biomedical perspectives and traditional views of medicine and healthcare. And then even within the profession, it's often disagreements about what, for example, a core competency or an entry-level competency is. It's a rather complex set of views, you know, that has a long history. So navigating those, really what I've found is that what you're describing, really listening to people and trying to find common ground, and then anchoring the conversation in that common ground to try and get away from some of those disagreements is a skill that I've had to develop very quickly. to do what needs to get done, and I don't know, I guess that's just my own experience. I don't know if it's so much a question, but if people have reflections on that.
Thanks for sharing, Dylan. Sounds like that's also a strength of yours that you now have, which would be interesting to hear more about how you've gone about it. And I'm hearing Lauren also has a similar strength in many ways. So maybe she wants to share.
You mentioned you kind of found your way into these positions of leadership. Do you enjoy it? I mean, it sounds really stressful, but I mean, I understand pros and cons.
That's a really interesting question that I sometimes think about. Yeah, it's a really, I'm passionate about it, and that helps. I feel motivated to do it, so that helps. I also find that I'm the person that has to do it. I often, at this point in my own career, I'm trying to teach other people the skill sets that I've learned so that I don't need to do it all. But I often find that my own history is, because it was a little bit of a unique progression into the area that I'm at, it's difficult to do that. Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah, I can't imagine that it was a straightforward or easy pathway into, you said traditional Chinese medicine, right? That's interesting. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all. That wasn't so much a question, but open if you want to, but you don't have to if you don't want
to. I mean, my own history as a practitioner was how I started, and getting into leadership was a little bit of an unintentional progression that went from practicing to teaching to further study myself, and then one of my main mentors, who was in a leadership role and worked at the WHO and things like that. And so he kind of, I eventually started taking on more positions that his English is not great. So I became the communicator, really. So when it came to communicating with Ontario and navigating regulation in this province, then that was kind of, I was in a natural position to start doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good, so many like good points that you bring up there, but like mentorship, trying to teach other people, like sharing skills and bringing in others or yourself, if that's a skill that's needed. I always find it very interesting when we have diversity or equity, diversity, and inclusivity conversations. I find we often focus on sort of the things that we can't change about ourselves in these conversations, and they focus on like gender, sex identity, culture, race, ethnicity, etc. And then our idea of a skills matrix is completely separate from this idea of diversity and inclusivity, and yet skills perspectives are equally as much a part of inclusivity and diversity, and sharing, coming in, making space for different perspectives, even when it's going to lead to conflict. But conflicting opinions are not necessarily conflict, and conflict in an organization is not necessarily dysfunction, but it's all uncomfortable. And it's just, I find this a very interesting thought exercise of, we think about EDI, about trying to make things more comfortable, but there is necessary discomfort in making things more comfortable, especially for those of us who are in sort of majority positions quite often at the time. but just really trying to navigate that and help others through it, help yourself through it, however you get there. Thanks for sharing your story. Really interesting. Good luck. And congrats.
So, yes, Dylan, thank you very much for bringing that into the mix, and for being open about, like, I just feel compelled to share this. And I don't know what it will bring to the group, but what I heard it bring was, and Lauren, you really brought in the EDI well there, and that the ability to be in the discomfort is growth, right? Is allowing you to step into what could be more comfortable for you. And I'm not specifically talking about one person, I'm talking about anyone, right? And that's in some ways, a lot of the work we do, right? Like Lauren talked about creating stress. We're creating discomfortable moments. We're creating, and this is not just in the program, this is part of daily life, right? Everything changes so much. This pandemic has been uncomfortable for so many reasons, on so many levels, for so many people. And navigating through that to then see, well, things will change at some point, and that change may be more comfortable, maybe less comfortable, but at some point that will change too. Yeah. So maybe this would be a good time to close, because I have invited everybody to share, and everybody has been really gracious with their time. And Lauren, especially, thank you for being open to putting on this this presentation, for sharing your views, and for being so present and open and transparent about your own experiences in this journey. Disney won't get to see the great feature that you just put on for them, but maybe half of us will go back and watch Finding Nemo. So
how did they manage the environment, the other people, and themselves? Oh, I'm so sorry if that's what you think of now when you watch the movie. Sorry, not sorry, I think.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for listening to this and being part of this conversation.